Before March 1st, 2000, Aberdeen in northern New South Wales was the kind of town people thought of as safe and quiet. It had a few shops, a slaughterhouse, some sheepdogs, and not much else. Nothing truly terrible had ever happened there. For a long time, Aberdeen was mostly known as the birthplace of the blue heeler, one of those dogs people see as part of Australia itself, right up there with the emu, koala, and kangaroo. But now the town is remembered for something far darker. 84 Andrew Street, an ordinary one-story house that became a place locals still hate to even look at. That was where Katherine Mary Knight did something that would put her name deep into Australian criminal history. Katherine was born on October 24th, 1955, in Tenterfield, 30 minutes after her twin sister Joy. By then, her mother Barbara already had 4 sons from earlier relationships: Patrick, Martin, Neville, and Barry. She also had Charlie with her new partner Ken Knight, and later another son, Shane, was born. The family was split up across towns and relatives for years. After Barbara's previous marriage ended, Patrick and Martin stayed with their father, Jack Ruffin, while Neville and Barry were sent to Sydney to live with an aunt. When Jack died in 1959, Patrick and Martin came back to their mother. Ken worked in slaughterhouses and moved the family around Queensland and New South Wales, wherever he could find hard labor. In 1969, he and Barbara finally settled in Aberdeen with their children because there was regular work at the local slaughterhouse. People who knew Katherine as a child said she seemed quiet and affectionate, even unusually gentle with animals. Her only trouble with the law came at 13, and it was minor enough that it was soon forgotten. What mattered more was the world she grew up in. Slaughterhouses were always close by, and in every town they lived in, the smell of fresh killing was just part of the air. Katherine got used to it. What most people would find sickening started to feel normal to her. So it wasn't surprising that at 16, she went to work at the Aberdeen slaughterhouse alongside her father, her twin sister Joy, and her brother Charlie. There weren't many women there, and she quickly adapted to the rough culture. She talked and swore like the men, and before long, nobody wanted to challenge her. If she had a knife in her hand and somebody said the wrong thing, she'd instantly dare them to settle it right there. No one ever did. She was especially proud of her boning knives, keeping them razor sharp and hanging them above her bed, so they were the last thing she saw at night. Later, that detail would feel a whole lot darker. It was there, surrounded by blood, steel, and carcasses, that the version of Katherine Knight, the country, would one day fear started taking shape. In 1973, she met 22-year-old truck driver David Kellett and quickly decided he was the man she wanted. As soon as she turned 18, she moved in with him, and a year later, they got married. The marriage was troubled from the start. Locals said that on their wedding night, Katherine tried to choke David after he refused to keep having sex as many times as she wanted. Later, when he got work at the same slaughterhouse, killing pigs, she would sometimes show up and silently watch him stun the animals. It didn't seem to bother her at all. When their daughter Melissa Ann was born in May 1976, any hope that a baby might steady the family disappeared fast. David could no longer cope with Katherine's violent outbursts and obsessive jealousy, and eventually he left her for another woman. Katherine saw that as more than heartbreak. To her, it was betrayal. Soon after he left, she placed 2-month-old Melissa on railroad tracks, where a train could have come at any time. A man collecting firewood nearby heard the baby crying and pulled her to safety. That same day, Katherine borrowed an axe from a neighbor and ran through the street, waving it around and threatening people, including an elderly man. She was arrested and taken to St. Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth, where doctors diagnosed her with postpartum depression and then released her. A few days later, she snapped again. She grabbed a large knife, slashed a woman she knew across the face, and demanded to be taken to David. The injured woman escaped by running into a gas station for help. When police arrived, they found Katherine holding a small boy by his clothes, waving a knife, and making threats. Officers had to pull the child away and struggle with her until she dropped the weapon. After that, she was placed under psychiatric observation. Baby Melissa was sent to stay with Barbara and Ken Knight. Police also contacted David, who was working in Queensland, and he and his mother Jean drove a long distance to reach her. Strangely, the moment Katherine saw David, she seemed to return to normal. On August 9th, 1976, she was released into Jean's care on the condition that her medication would be supervised. On the way back, they picked up Melissa, and within a couple of weeks, Katherine and David were living together again in a small rented house in Queensland. David found work as a truck driver, and Katherine got a job boning meat at a processing plant. But getting back together quickly turned into another disaster. Almost anything could set Katherine off, and she would go after David with whatever was nearby. Her fists, pots, even knives. In the middle of all that chaos, their second daughter, Natasha Marie, was born on March 6th, 1980. Then in 1984, David came home and found the house empty. Katherine had taken the girls, packed up, and gone back to her parents' farm near Aberdeen. She returned to slaughterhouse work, started using her maiden name again, and later moved with the children into a rented house in a nearby town. About a year later, years of hard slaughterhouse labor ruined her back and forced her to leave the only job she seemed to truly love. She was then given public housing in Aberdeen, which suited her well enough. It was close to the school, the children were nearby, and she had benefits and steady income. But one thing was still missing from her life: a man. In 1986, after several failed relationships, she met David Saunders, a 38-year-old miner from nearby Scone. He was tough, charismatic, and known for drinking too much. Despite Katherine's violent past and explosive temper, she could still come across as funny, energetic, and magnetic, and Saunders was drawn in fast. At first, things seemed good. He kept his apartment in Scone but moved in with Katherine and her daughters. Soon, though, her jealousy took over. She constantly accused him of affairs that never happened. They screamed, split up, got back together, and repeated that cycle again and again. Before long, the abuse turned physical. Katherine, who was taller than Saunders, attacked him with her fists, her feet, and whatever else she could grab. Then came the incident he never forgot. In May 1987, to show him what would happen if he looked at another woman, Katherine kissed his 2-month-old puppy with a knife. When he rushed at her in horror, she struck him with a frying pan so hard he blacked out. Even after that, he stayed. In June of the following year, Katherine gave birth to their daughter Sarah. For a short time, things calmed down enough for Saunders to put a deposit on a small house in Aberdeen. the first real home Katherine had ever had. When her disability payments came through in 1989, she paid off the rest. Then she filled the house with the kind of things she was drawn to: hides, horns, skulls, antlers, rusty tools, boots, a whip, a saddle, and piles of old newspapers, books, and clothes. Most of her VHS collection was horror movies and recordings about death. The place felt less like a home and more like a window into her mind. That brief sense of stability didn't last. She attacked Saunders again, once hitting him with an iron and, according to him, even coming at him with scissors. Later, when he tried to make peace, she showed him she had cut up all his clothes and dumped them out like trash. That was the moment he finally disappeared. He went into hiding, and although Katherine spent weeks trying to track him down, nobody helped her. When he returned months later just to see his daughter, he found out Katherine had already gone to police and claimed she was afraid of him. That led to an order keeping him away from the house, from her, and from the children. Not long after, Katherine began seeing John Chillingworth, a 43-year-old slaughterhouse worker. She got pregnant, and in 1991 gave birth to a son, Eric. That relationship lasted only 3 years before she did what she had done before: cast him aside when she found someone new. That new man was John Price. In a twisted way, Chillingworth was lucky. Katherine discarded him before she could ruin him completely, and he eventually got sober and rebuilt his life. John Price would not get that chance. People in town later said that by getting involved with Katherine, he had unknowingly stepped straight into his own death. John Price was in his late 30s and known as a decent, stubborn, kind man who was always willing to help people. He had already been through a divorce, lived with his 2 older children, owned a modest brick house, and worked in the local mines for a decent wage. He met Katherine in a pub in 1993. They were both 38, and before long people were seeing them together all over town. Price knew about her reputation. He had heard the stories about how she treated men, but he either didn't believe them or convinced himself things would be different with him. And at first, it really did look different. Katherine seemed caring, attentive, and passionate. She packed his lunches, fixed his shirts, and picked him up from pubs when he had too much to drink. The kids got along, the evenings were calm, and for a while, it felt like life was finally improving. But it didn't last. Soon, Katherine began accusing John of cheating. Then came the arguments, the threats, the leaving, and the returning. Their relationship slipped into the same cycle she had repeated for years: rage, jealousy, reconciliation, and promises that never lasted. By the end of 1995, Katherine had moved into Price's neat family home. Compared to her cluttered McQueen Street place full of hides and skulls, his house must have felt almost luxurious. Still, peace never lasted around her. The drinking got worse, the fights got louder, and people in Aberdeen saw them screaming in the street and making scenes in the same pubs where their romance had started. One minute they were laughing and kissing, and the next she was throwing out insults so vicious the whole room went quiet. In 1998, Katherine secretly showed Price's bosses at the mine a videotape she had made at home. It showed items she claimed he had taken from work. Later, she said she did it out of revenge after another fight about the fact that he still refused to marry her. She had first meant to use the tape only against John, but after another ugly argument, she handed it to his employer. Even though the items were expired, written off, and basically taken from the company dump. It was still enough to get him fired. That same day, Price threw her out and sent her back to McQueen Street. The whole town heard about it fast. People already knew her temper and her history, so the only real surprise was that a few months later Price let her back into his life, even if he still would not let her move in for good. That choice cost him more than his job. It cost him his friends too. A lot of people stopped spending time with him because nobody wanted Katherine suddenly showing up. After that, things only got worse. They drank, fought over his lost job, and screamed at each other in public all over town. By then, people in Aberdeen were no longer asking if they would break up. They were asking when something terrible would finally happen. It was obvious they couldn't live together, but somehow they couldn't stay apart either. Soon, Katherine had keys to his house again, and the violence escalated. Then, on February 29th, 2000, during one of their fights, she stabbed John in the chest. He went to court and got a restraining order that banned her from coming near him or his home. But even that didn't stop her. That same night, Price came home hoping for some peace. Around 11, after leaving the neighbor's house, he got into bed and heard a car pull up. It was Katherine. She walked in like nothing had happened, sat down, watched TV, took a shower, and got into bed beside him. Then they had sex. It was the same toxic cycle they always repeated. Fear, fighting, making up, and another blow-up waiting right behind it. The next morning around 6, a neighbor noticed Price's work truck was still outside, which was unusual because he always left much earlier. The neighbor got worried, and so did Price's employer when he didn't show up for work. The neighbor and another man knocked on the bedroom window, then went to the front door and saw blood. Right after that, they called the police. By 8 that morning, officers forced open the back door and entered the house. What they found stayed with them forever. John Price's skin had been removed in one piece from head to groin and hung from a metal hook in the living room doorway. Nearby, his decapitated body lay on the floor. As police continued searching, they found Katherine Knight in the farthest bedroom, loudly snoring on a double bed. She was heavily sedated and seemed not to understand what had happened. Officers carried her from the house and took her to a hospital. That was how one of the most horrifying nights in Australian criminal history came to an end. A night Aberdeen would never forget. What follows comes from the forensic investigator who was among the first inside the house after John Price's body was discovered. In a case like this, the detective's job is to personally inspect the full scene and document everything exactly as it appears before anything is disturbed. At about 10 a.m. on Wednesday, March 1st, 2000, I arrived at 84 Andrew Street in Aberdeen with Detective Neil Raymond in connection with a suspected homicide. The property was a single-story, 3-bedroom house positioned toward the eastern side of the lot. Along the western strip of grass were 3 parked vehicles: a white 4-wheel drive Toyota, a white Ford sedan, and a white Toyota Land Cruiser pickup. At the back of the property were 2 corrugated steel sheds, one in each far corner. Along the eastern boundary stood a brick barbecue. The south side of the house had a long veranda running the full width of the building, along with a small rear porch in the center. On the back lawn in front of the white Ford sedan, I noticed a piece of cooked meat. I examined it, took possession of it for analysis, and photographed both the item and the property after the scene was secured. Detective Raymond and I then entered the house through the back door for a preliminary examination. As soon as we stepped into the kitchen, I saw a piece of human skin hanging from the top of the doorway leading into the living room. It stretched from the top of the frame down to the floor and looked almost like a complete outer layer of a human body. Through that doorway, I could see a decapitated and skinned human body lying in the living room. I then moved east along the hallway and looked toward the entry hall. A large pool of blood was on the floor, and broad blood stains marked the eastern wall. Farther down the hall, blood traces led into the master bedroom, where I also observed fresh blood markings, though in a smaller amount. The kitchen dining room was divided into two sections. The western half was the kitchen, and the eastern half was the dining area. There was a wooden table with a metal frame and 3 matching chairs. Clothes hung over each chair, and on the table were a tool bag, clothing, a small blue folder, an electronic gorilla toy, and boxes of medication. I noticed a blood stain on the shoulder of a blue shirt hanging over the chair on the western side of the table. Near the center of the kitchen was an electric cooktop. On it sat an aluminum pot and a baking tray. The human skin hanging in the doorway showed black curly hair at the upper section, along with a nose and part of a mouth and ear. Around the middle was a patch of short black curly hair resembling pubic hair. No other obvious identifying features were visible. The skin reached to the floor, and the cut edges were clean, suggesting a sharp instrument had been used. There were also stab or cut wounds in the upper section. The skin had been suspended with a stainless steel meat hook inserted through the upper head area and hooked over the frame on the living room side. A blood trail ran from the living room toward the cooktop. The rear burner under the aluminum pot was off, but the pot was still warm. When I lifted the lid, I saw it was filled with liquid, and floating inside was a skinned human head together with cooked vegetables. Beside it, on the front right burner, was a baking tray containing liquid and the remains of roasted vegetables. To the right of the stove were 2 prepared dinner plates. Each plate held 2 pieces of cooked meat, along with baked potato, pumpkin, zucchini, cabbage, and gravy. Under each serving was a paper towel with a name written on it. One was marked Becky and the other Jonathan. The cooked meat on those plates appeared consistent with the piece I had recovered from the back lawn. On the north side kitchen counter were several other items of interest. A green electric kettle at the western end had bloodstains on its handle. In the sink were an orange vegetable peeler and peelings from potato, pumpkin, zucchini, and onion. To the east of the sink sat a light cream microwave dish containing boiled cabbage leaves in clear liquid. In front of it was a brown coffee mug placed on a wooden cutting board. A teaspoon was inside the mug, and at the bottom was a small amount of thick brown liquid resembling gravy. The same substance was also present on the cutting board. To the right of the cutting board, I found a yellow-handled knife and 2 forks. There was blood on the knife handle. On the eastern side of the breakfast bar, I saw a small black-handled knife and 4 empty medication packets. Also on the counter were a gray coffee mug with blood on it and a white, greasy substance inside, an empty beer bottle, a pack of cigarettes, and a black wallet belonging to the deceased. On the kitchen floor, near the southwest corner of the counter, I found a black barefoot print. I also noted blood on the refrigerator, on the handle, and on the eastern side. There were smeared marks on that side panel, and below them were drops of blood that had run downward. As I noted earlier, the living room was south of the dining room, separated by a sliding door. The decapitated and skinned body, later identified as John Price, was lying on its back, with the lower legs extending toward the entry hall. The carpet around the body was saturated with blood. There was also a large pool of blood in the entry hall. In that blood and in the smear marks, I could see signs that the body had been moved about a meter from the middle of the hall onto the carpet in the living room. The deceased was on his back with his feet crossed, the left ankle resting over the right. His left arm was extended away from the body at about a 45-degree angle. The right arm was also extended, lying close to the body. Near that right arm was a blood-stained knife, measuring 31 centimeters long with a yellow plastic handle. The blade itself measured 17.5 centimeters. The body had been almost entirely stripped of skin and soft tissue, leaving exposed muscle and some internal structures. There were multiple injuries. The most significant was a stab wound to the left side of the chest that entered the chest cavity. As already mentioned, the removal of the skin showed a high level of precision and technical skill. From the blood pattern on the carpet, investigators concluded the skinning happened before the head was removed. A clear outline of the victim's head could still be seen in the bloodstain. Examination of the neck showed the head had been severed cleanly with a sharp instrument. In an armchair in the northeast corner near the victim's shoulders, I found a sharpening steel with a black handle and an open pack of cigarettes. Bloody handprints were visible on the back and arms of the chair. Against the north wall, just west of the kitchen doorway, stood a small display cabinet. On top of it was a broken photo frame containing a photograph of the victim, and lying over it was a blood-stained wristwatch. Farther west on the same surface was a blood-stained note with another broken photograph placed on top. The note also had small fragments of flesh on it. The writing was messy and misspelled. It read, "Time got you back, Jonathan, for raping my daughter. You to Becky for Ross, for little John." Those accusations were not supported by any facts. For detectives, the overall picture was clear. Katherine Knight had killed John Price, removed his skin, cut off his head, cooked the head, and arranged parts of the body, including flesh from the buttocks, as food. The piece of cooked meat found in the backyard came from the same area and matched the meat placed on the prepared plates, which appeared to have been set out for Price's children in case they returned home that night. Since Price's son and daughter, named in the note as Becky and Little John, were not in the house during the killing, investigators considered it unlikely they were truly expected to come back to a meal that had already been prepared. The detective who examined the house later described it this way. As he moved down the hallway, he saw blood spatter on the walls at shoulder height, which showed him the victim had been fighting desperately for his life. Price had gone to sleep after sex, then woke up under a series of knife attacks. There was blood on the robe lying on the bed, a bloody handprint on the door frame, and blood near the light switch, suggesting he may have tried to turn on the light. Bloody hand marks continued down the hallway. He almost reached the exit and even opened the front door, but the screen door was still closed. There was more blood on it too. The detective believed Price came very close to getting out, but would not have survived his injuries. In the detective's view, John Price was in full panic, trying to escape while the stabbing continued. The autopsy showed that John Price was already dead before the skin was removed. The forensic pathologist who handled the postmortem said the skinning and the related actions took around 40 minutes. Even after long and detailed questioning, Katherine Knight said she could not remember anything from that night after arriving at the house and having sex with John Price. Then on March 6th, 2000, just a week later, she was formally charged with his murder. The hearing was held right at her bedside in the psychiatric ward at Maitland Hospital. When the trial began in October 2001, Katherine pleaded guilty. That meant Price's family did not have to sit through the full presentation of all the evidence. Court-appointed psychiatrists also said she had been fully sane at the time of the crime. On November 8th, the judge sentenced Katherine Mary Knight to life in prison without parole and ordered that her file be marked "Never to be released." She later tried to appeal that sentence, but the court rejected it. To this day, people still argue about whether Katherine ate any part of Price's body after cooking his head in pieces taken from his buttocks. It was never fully established whether every part of the body was recovered. Katherine claimed the only thing she remembered from that night was having sex. After that, she said, she remembered Price getting up to go to the bathroom, coming back to bed, and then she must have fallen asleep. Most investigators and specialists believed some of what she did may have been pushed out of her memory. Katherine Knight, now 70 years old, is still being held in a women's correctional center in New South Wales, where she works as a cleaner. And even though she clearly knew her way around a kitchen, it is considered extremely unlikely she would ever be allowed to work in one there. So that's the story. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.